light, in soft play. Praise when the bushes, praise when God's recreation of the new day.
Yeah. So I was in the middle of saying, the rules are, for many people still, don't try pronouncing YHWH. You instead use the word in Jewish tradition that means Lord, and that became Lord and Dominus and Kyrie and in English Lord. But it wasn't that at the beginning. When Moses first stood at the burning bush and the voice said, one of my names is, okay, so I welcome you, if you're willing, to try pronouncing YHWH with no vowels at all. Do it a little bit louder. Right, and that's what happened to me the first time I ever did this. A breath. And I thought, now that makes sense. At least one of the real names of the real God shouldn't be in Hebrew or Sanskrit or Latin or Greek or English, not only in those languages, but in all of them. And the only thing that is breathing. And the second thing that came to me was, it's not just human languages. Every life form on the planet breathes. And not in a bubble, but we breathe in, but the trees breathe out. The trees breathe in, but we breathe out. The breathing, which is also, by the way, or not so by the way, what we call the climate crisis, is a crisis in the breathing of the planet. The human species figure out how to pour more CO2 into the air than the planet knows how to absorb. So, the blessing I wanted to share was, blessed are you, the interbreathing of all life, who breathes into us the awareness that we share that breath with all of life, who breathes into us the impulse to shape our breath into words, and who breathes into us the desire to shape our words so that they aim toward fuller, deeper wisdom. And together, may the church say, Amen.
Amen.
Here.
We have a minor problem. Am I the only person that's supposed to be here as a leader? I have a leader who organized us. He's not here. And my other three panelists aren't here. Is another panelist in the room that's hiding?
Me. You and me.
Yeah, so you got your young ones.
There's just two of you, I think.
They're just two of you, yeah.
That's right.
Oh, you are a leader.
Yeah.
See, this happens in Philadelphia all the time.
He thought he was in the afternoon workshop.
What's your name? Oh, good. Well, we're all set then.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to strive for a little clarity on how we're moving forward, whether somebody is going to present something or whether we just want to tackle, how we're going to do coalition building. This is
Okay,
I'm sorry, this
That's
was
the afternoon.
my bad. I'm in the wrong room. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Sir, don't go away.
We
I
welcome you.
spoke to that workshop as a thing, and this is where I want to be.
I have a
apologize for being
metaphysical
wrong.
problem. I'm supposed to be in two places at one time. But I'm going to stay with Arthur.
The coalition building thing is in the afternoon.
That's the afternoon.
This is religious communities.
Right,
Yes, I
it's
know.
the morning.
What he thinks, the guy that just left us, he said he's going to go to the coalition meeting. So that's all.
That's actually.
Yeah, it's in the
You are on the list.
And it's
for the
here in the
second
afternoon.
So,
Go ahead. What-
Okay, so we know what we're doing here.
Right.
Thank you for the reassurance.
So in the paper that we received, it mentioned the National Council of Churches, the Catholic Resistance, and all those little code words. When Arthur and I met a week ago at a nice little Indian restaurant, we decided, rather than each of us making a 30-minute presentation or a 20-minute, that we thought there'd be 15 or 20 people or more, and you all came here with some interest or some ideas. And we thought we'd like to begin with some of your questions or ideas, and then we have other things we'd like to share with you, but we didn't think it best to just begin with 20 minutes of me and 20 minutes of Arthur. So, kind of curious why you all showed up at this meeting. Are you all religious?
No.
Yeah. Well, why'd you come to this meeting? Yeah.
My name is Michael, and I'm very glad to be with you this morning. Thank you very much, Dick, Rabbi. I represent the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of Maryland, and I have the same metaphysical problem because I would like to be in Baltimore all day today.
Yeah.
But this is only going to happen now on May 2nd, and my guess is that I'll have another chance to get to Baltimore very soon. So we do legislative advocacy. We don't call it lobbying because that has an evil connotation. And we work often in coalition with the other faith-based organization in Annapolis, our state capital, which is the Conference of Bishops. But of course, Unitarians and Catholics don't always agree on all issues involving human rights, particularly when they affect the rights of those human beings who are double X chromosome human beings. So when we work together, we usually get what we want from the Maryland State Legislature, the abolition of the death penalty, the reform of our criminal justice laws. But when we don't always see eye to eye, then it's more of a coalition, careful negotiation for how far we can go. I'm very pleased to say that Rich Madaleno, the senior senator from District 18 in the Maryland State Legislature, was the first openly Unitarian and openly gay member of the state Senate in Maryland and led the effort to bring marriage equality to our state. I am here because it has never worked for me to not be able to participate actively in worship as part of the faith enterprise to move towards a more full realization of my humanity by recognizing the humanity of others. And I'd like to find out how to renew our faith and to move forward together and to bring a generation of young people into the faith communities where we can make trusting, loving decisions together. Thank you.
Yeah, I am here because I belong to, or I collaborate with two religious groups. One of them Unitarian Universalists.
I'm sorry, your name?
My name is Jose Luis Sanchez. And of all the breakout groups, I thought this is perhaps the most relevant for me in terms of being able to implement and move forward on the lessons from the Vietnam War through involvement in religious groups.
Scott Wright and with Ox Christi and other Catholic groups. I'm struck with two things. One, Arthur, your passion about the environment, the web of life, and how it's connected to, and ultimately to everything, every issue. And I agree in many respects. I mean, the war in Syria and South Sudan has roots in climate change, conflict between ethnic groups. I've seen, I think, there are more forced migrants because of climate change, extreme weather events, than war and conflict at the moment. And so the one question is, what are the lessons in terms of clergy and laity concern, how it came together? What would a calc look like today, focused on that web of life, the climate change, but also migration, the interethnic conflicts, racism, peace, all of those? What are the lessons learned? How did calc come together? What can we learn from that, and what would it look like today, basically? Thank you.
I'm Taylor Branch, I'm from Baltimore.
You pronounce it right, I hear.
I've been going to nonviolent training sessions the last 3 days in Baltimore, and at each one, the attendance has been 4 to 10 times what was expected. There's a lot of nonviolent training going on. To me, it's new as a civil rights historian. It reminds me of the painful fact that nonviolence became passé in the movement toward the end. And I know it's around, but I'm wondering whether or not it's more broadly based than I think. I hope that's the case. That's one reason I came here. The other reason I came here is the question, the church and you leaders we were also involved through the church and out of the church in the Vietnam. Now we're in a low-grade perpetual war thing, and my question is how and why the church-related groups could mobilize for that when there's not the high-grade crisis that we felt in Vietnam. So that we've reverted to the position that Dr. King used to say, that the church is against every war except the one we're in.
Why don't we take one more, David?
Yeah, I'm David Brown. I'm retired United Methodist clergy from Philadelphia. And I'm here because most of my adult life has been trying to work within and through the church, or with the church and as a pastor through the church. I'm currently involved with gun violence prevention in a faith-based organization.
Thank you.
And I'm also involved in a work called Healing Wounds of Racism in Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of United Methodist Church. And we in the church, there's a lot we talk about going out, but there's a lot we need to do internally, including facing our own racism, including facing our own militarism, including facing our own materialism. Those are the triplets that Dr. King. So I wanted to have some attention to that.
Why don't we,
Wait, there's one group of people in the room hasn't spoken at all.
that's right,
That's true.
there is one.
So, interesting, maybe a hangover from the past
Yeah,
of the
yes.
religious traditions. There are many fewer women than men in the room, and not a single woman has spoken yet. So,
Thank you.
please.
Nice job.
I'll speak. I'm here because I've been wandering around from one church to the next looking for somebody to say something about the situation we're in. And I used to go to this church until they changed the subject from war to environment. And that the first one went away and the second one came in, and so I wandered off looking for where they all went. I also have been at Friends Meeting of Washington, which was very active in Vietnam days from what I've heard from the late Barbara Noka, but now they can't get it together. Their peace group is never meets, and they just talk endlessly and don't do anything. So then I would go to Grace Episcopal Church in Georgetown, where they are interested in racial justice. The minister has a black wife, which is interesting. But he will not show the movies of the civil rights sit-ins in Nashville in 1959, when the seminarian from the divinity school there, whose name was Lawson, I believe it was asked to leave the divinity school because he was helping to organize those sit-ins in downtown Nashville, and it so upset the powers that be that the chancellor or whatever it was asked this Mr. Lawson to finish his divinity thing up in Boston so he would be off, get him out of the way. We'll give you the degree, but you're ruffling the feathers here. So that's what bothers me, is how do you get a faith community to organize when so many people have a vested interest in the wars? All these people, I asked one lady at the little Georgetown church, I said, why can't we talk about this? And she said, shh, there are people sitting around this group who are making plenty of money and they can't embarrass those people because they'll leave the church and won't give the money, and the church needs the money. Period.
Ouch.
Any other women before anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, Sally King. I'm a Quaker and a Buddhist and a scholar of the Buddhist role in the Vietnam War. And that's one of the things that brought me here, and just also a sense looking forward that there's so much potential in different faith groups to contribute. I'm particularly concerned about the climate change issue and how to take the base, the energy and values and commitments in different faith groups, build on the interfaith movement that is getting stronger and clearer in this country, and how that might be a force.
I'm Jean Staughton, also with Pax Christi, and I just build on Scott's question about what would the calc look like today. And I know there's pockets, I mean, Reverend Barber and the Moral Mondays, and there's individuals and pockets, but that in terms of that united, and then the United Peace voice too, or the naming of the military-industrial complex, whatever. Of course, you can't sell that, it's a thing, but how do we really focus on lifting up a moral voice, perhaps as an add-on to other movements better?
For me, when I think about these things, and the issue of calc, or what's the religious community doing these days, and specifically around war and peace, but also the environment, although there seems to be, in the world I live in, a lot more energy around environment than there does around Syria or Afghanistan or all of those, is always try to make sure you're clear about the history of the past and acknowledge you can't repeat history very easily, but there may be elements, and you have to pick and choose to see what fits, and you have to do it carefully. So I'll give you just a little background about the family. And so I was hired, I had a secretary, a room with no windows, and my 3x5 cars. And I had never done anything international. I had to ask someone, they said, what do I want to get paid? I didn't know how you, it was the last thing in my mind, what do I want to get paid? And so I had to ask some people. My office was in the building of the National Council of Churches. So I asked some friends, well, what do I should I get paid? They gave me a number. I said, that's what I'm going to be paid. My concern was money to travel, because I realized we didn't have a PR firm, and how you're going to get the word out. You can't just keep sending mailings. Although back then we thought mailings were the beginning and end of the world. I mean, mailings were wonderful, except the stuffing of them. But I had, and this is where we begin to talk about, can you do this today? So I had a letterhead, in my view, it was kind of a who's who of progressive church leaders. And in the Protestant system, a church leader in 1966, whether it was Bishop Lord, whether it was Robert McAfee Brown, whether it was all these names, William Sunkoff and Paul Moore, the bishop of, he was in Washington at that time. One of the interesting things about my letterhead was over half of the people on that had been in the military. They'd been CIA agents.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay? These were, and I hate to say it, that first letterhead was all men. These are pretty tough SOB men who had been through war. And so they were pretty brave chaps before they ever put the name on a letterhead. So that's not, I don't take that lightly. I thought of that later in life. I didn't think of it at the time. I just thought they were names. But what it did for me was, when I wrote David Brown and said, David, I'm coming to New Haven, and you, with a few other clergy, a couple of months ago, responded to this national group. We had a little press conference to go on the bombing cause. And I'd like to come and talk to some clergy about what else could be done. And David would say, okay. And I say two things. David, can we meet at your church, and could you bring some people from around the community who aren't just Methodists? And David said, I know a couple. Well, then I looked at my 3x5 cards, and I said, I have 2 names for you that you may not know. And David said, I know one, I don't know the other, but I'll call them. Right? And then I'd go to town, and I'd meet with 15 or 20 people. Some of them knew each other well, depending on the size of the city. Some of them didn't even know each other so well. But without that letterhead, David, I would have called up, my name is Dick Fernandez. That's F-E-R-N-A-N-D. And I'm in New York. So it just opened the door. Okay? I didn't understand that until I was my first trip. And I realized, I'm riding on the backs of all these famous people.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was, now, what was at the base of them coming together? Whether you were a Methodist, a Unitarian, a Catholic, or anything else, when you banded together, you did it as religious people. You were not joining a new organization. You were there because at your church, you and one other person were the only 2 people that gave a darn about the Vietnam War. And in your church, half the people supported it, or they're making money off it, or whatever it was. So this gave you a way out of your religious values to do something about the war in your town with other people who were in similar situations all over town. Some of the pastors got in trouble. Some of the pastors got in trouble over little things, a leaflet or a sermon, but they had a support group. Not all the pastors or rabbis got in trouble, right? Some did, some didn't. And the organization grew pretty quickly because it turns out, not rationally, but we found we had a niche. We were Habitat for Humanity during the Vietnam War. We had a niche. The other thing that's the case is on the front page of the paper in the 60s, it was Vietnam, 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 Vietnam. And on page 2, Vietnam, Vietnam. On the editorial page, Vietnam, Vietnam. That made 2 things happen. You didn't lose focus very easily, and increasingly as the war became less and less popular, fundraising became, in my view, easier. You didn't have to say, there's a war in Vietnam, and say, where is that? Okay? Why should I give it? And then, of course, we had our young men and women going to war. I was one of those people, as the war was winding down, with friend Jim Bristol, we put our little letterhead together to end the draft, right? In my town, 60 people from one high school, all black, died. So I wasn't in favor of the draft. It seemed like a great idea, but I should have been smarter when Barry Goldwater and Bill Buckley, the conservative columnist, put the name on the same letterhead. I should have thought, now wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be on that letterhead, but I did it, kind of like, so we thought ending the draft was a good idea at that time. All I'm saying about the clergy group was we had this nice letterhead. We discovered a niche, calling people out, and the clergy loved to have laity that they found pretty quickly. I won't look at anybody in the room, but what I found was out of every 10 clergy that would get engaged, one of them was a real hard worker on this issue. Now, they all cared about it and did different things, but the nuts and bolts of it were done by the lay people. Women at that time were in a different position than they are today. We're at the very beginning of the women's movement as the war began to crank up. We had women who had more time to make themselves available for doing all kinds of stuff to make this stuff happen. So that's a little different. People are busy now, and busy with important things. And many women are engaged in what I would call women's organizations that weren't even around at that time. So we have a different sociology in terms of activism than we did in the 60s. The last thing, and then Arthur maybe want to contribute to this, the last thing I say is, and it pertains a little bit to your comments about your coalition there in Baltimore or in Maryland. only on a couple occasions did the issue of the Middle East come up. And it was always raised by a rabbi. Big surprise, no surprise. And usually another rabbi would say, we're not going to deal with that issue in this room. This is not what we're here for. Until the Six-Day War. Until the Six-Day War. And I wish I had recordings of the 3 or 4 of America's most distinguished rabbis who were on our letterhead who called me almost in tears saying, Dick, I have to beg off this now. Keep my name on the letterhead. I'll be back. But I'm being called someplace else. And I don't have time to give to this. Maurice Eisendrath, Lelyville. I mean, it's kind of a who's who.
All but Heschel.
Yeah, all but Heschel. All but Heschel. So in the ecumenical work I've done all of my life in Philadelphia, when we get together with people who are Catholic, Muslim, etc., one of us is smart enough right off the bat to say, well, there are 2 or 3 issues this group won't deal with. We will deal with it in another form. Because you know there are some divisive issues right there on the table. All you have to do is say gay, lesbian, reproductive rights, and you have a division in the room. Now, I'm all for the discussion in mixed groups of those issues for the sake of just talking out in a nice, civil way how we're dealing with those issues. But as an organizer, that's another room. That's another room. I don't want to, in the middle of trying to organize a demonstration in Baltimore this week, have to deal with, well, let's deal with one of these hard issues. I'll do that in another room at another time, at any time, because I think it's worth talking about. And I think it is a good thing for people from different traditions. One part of my work in Philadelphia right now is with a group called the Philadelphia Interfaith Center. We have great service learning work with high school students. And they talk about this stuff among Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Catholic, and they actually have discussions about reproductive rights. And they don't get mad and throw shoes at each other and swear and curse and judge, and they're happy for the discussion. We've gotten a little feedback from the clergy of their congregations, but it's not been hostile, it's been light. We're a little concerned about what's said, and we don't hand out paper. It's all what you bring to the table in your heart and your head. So we stop. Does that help you a little bit?
Yeah. No,
I don't think you need a letterhead to organize churches and synagogues. I was speaking to someone who is in this national office, and what do I do? How do I do it? And so I do think calling people out of their congregation. In this instance, we have many people in our congregations who are, quote unquote, concerned about the environment, concerned about war and peace, and they're very busy. The reason to call them out now is to get their attention and get some agreement in a group of a variety of congregations to do something together. It's not because half the congregation is for the war in Afghanistan. I don't think that's out there. Half the congregation doesn't care about the environment. Okay? The issue is you want a group that's going to focus real attention on a issue or a group of issues for a protracted period of time, and you need to call them out, and you might have 8 different traditions in the room or different denominations, and make verbal commitments about let's try this for a year, or let's try this for, and the way we organize, see who's up for what kind of commitment of time and energy and.
So I want to pick up on the question that sort of bubbled. You said it explicitly.
Yeah.
What does it mean for a gathering that focused around the work we did around a war to explore other, or at least what we usually define as other questions? Like, I don't use the word environment, it means it's out there. The Hebrew, there is an English equivalent. The Hebrew is, the word for human being is Adam. The word for earth is Adamah. Adam, Adamah is like this, not like, oh, the environment that's out there. If English let you use earthling as a regular word for human beings instead of a woo-woo kind of a science fiction word, earthling would do it, but in English it's hard. So why, have I, who, you know, I spent enormous amounts of energy on the Iraq war, why have I and the Shalom Center and a number of other Jews chosen to work either now on peace between Israel and Palestine, and now organizations exist, at least two serious ones that didn't exist at all, J Street and Jewish Voice for Peace, with very different politics, or seemingly different politics, but they're both independent of the official Jewish, Israeli, etc., official version. So we are, first of all, the climate issue is a lethal issue. It's already killed thousands of people. It will kill millions. In fact, if you count the civil wars in Syria and Central Africa, it's already killed at least hundreds of thousands. And it will start killing millions as it gets worse. And not only is it killing people, it's taking people who are hungry and making them, and giving them, putting them into starvation, not hunger, because the food prices rise. And people who are, you know, sort of getting along, suddenly facing food price rises that are incredible. So California, around water, and therefore increasingly going to be around food, is, you know, in desperate situation. So I keep trying to do what I said last night. I use language I didn't use last night, but this is the language we use. I don't talk about capitalism, I talk about Pharaoh. Religious language that is about top-down, unaccountable, irresponsible, cruel, and arrogant power. And that is certainly about the climate stuff. We talk about the plagues, right? And we don't, I mean, my theology is not the plagues were imposed by a super pharaoh in the sky doing magic, but that the plagues happened because all life is in fact intertwined, that Moses and Aaron and Miriam understood that, and Pharaoh thought, just like Don Rumsfeld said, each plague scared the hell out of him, and then he caught his breath and he said, oh, you know, shit happens, or what Rumsfeld said, you know, little euphemism, stuff happens. Because he didn't understand that everything was connected. And he thought he was God, and he could impose, and yeah, shit happens, but I'm God. So we use that language, which is language that not only officially, explicitly religious people, but practically everybody in the society knows something about that language. It speaks to them. And okay, so I don't use the language of capitalism, though I do celebrate May Day. I called up a couple of friends of mine yesterday and said, good Yontif, which is the Yiddish for happy holiday. What's the holiday? May Day, that's the holiday. There is going to be, I think, a big shift around the religious response to the climate question when Pope Francis comes to the United States. He's going to speak at the UN on climate. He's going to speak at the Congress on climate, speaking, I think, the day after Yom Kippur, really a little weird. If I were advising him what to do on Yom Kippur, it would be to go to one of the leading synagogues in Washington and spend all day there. And, all right, but...
Great idea.
Yeah, so anybody who, I don't have a telephone line to the Vatican. I mean, Heschel figured out how to do that, but I haven't. So anybody who does, and they're going to issue this encyclical this summer. Now I can remember when John the 23rd issued Pacem in Terris at Easter in 1963, and it created all kinds of waves, all kinds of waves. I expect this to create all kinds of waves. In fact, I've already been involved in creating one of those waves. We are right now, yesterday, Friday, I sent out 50 letters with a text that seven rabbis put together, a text of a rabbinic letter on the climate crisis. I sent it out to the next circle 50 rabbis, and then we will, when we have something like 50 or 70 names, we will go to the entire American rabbinate. And it occurred to me to do this because of the encyclical, and because of my memory of Pachamateras and my memory of the American bishops in 1982 on the bottom, right? Which also, I mean, the Shalom Center exists because of the bishops thing on the bottom. People in the Jewish community felt ashamed. Hey, you know, how come the bishops and the Jewish community ain't doing anything about the bomb? And the Shalom Center came into existence in response to that. So, willy-nilly, even if you want the churches to be focusing on the weird, perpetual, semi-level, not quite low-level war, there is going to be a wave of concern because of Pope Francis' visit, if nothing, and because California, Africa, Superstorm Sandy, the typhoon in the Philippines, all that stuff is, so I expect that's going to happen. And as I said, the pharaohs are not limited to big coal and big oil, big banking, big, name it, big pharma. The structure of American society, if you want to call it capitalism, go ahead. I call it pharaohs. That structure is similar where in the different arenas in which the power gets centered at the top and the oppression gets broader at the bottom. So, and that's why I'm here. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Mike Tabor, all my life. I just came back from Tanzania for 3 weeks, sponsored by Catholic Relief Services, even though they're Jewish, speaking about, in the Kilimanjaro region, talking about pesticides, herbicides, and why we couldn't eat the food in Tanzania. It was so full of pesticides. They were concerned about climate change a lot. This was the rainy season and there was no rain. There were floods, but no rain. But overwhelmingly, and Arthur's only indirectly mentioned it, since the massacre at the college happened right across the border in Kenya, and since Tanzania is well known as a country where Muslims and Christians live in peace, terrified over Islamic fundamentalism. And that's the question of how we as religious communities of peace face an issue of what appears to be a worldwide impending war. And along with climate change, I like to hope we could spend a little bit of time on that issue.
I just want to say, Mike Tabor, when I wrote the Freedom Seder, Mike Tabor organized the Freedom Seder through Jews for Urban Justice in 1969. So,
I think the book I wonder if everyone's heard about is This Changes Everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because Naomi Klein, right?
Yep.
Because it talks about the corporations and.
right.
The reason I'm here is because I wanted to raise perhaps a hard question, especially for Rabbi Waskow. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, of the DC Metro chapter here. And I was wondering, how do we apply the lessons of the protest against the war in Vietnam to the situation in Israel and Palestine? Ron Dellums was reminding us of a quotation from Dr. Martin Luther King, saying, peace is more than the absence of war. It is the presence of justice. Now, how do we promote justice for the Palestinians in the present conditions when there's war against Gaza, when there's a continuing expansion of settlements, and in the West Bank, when olive trees are being destroyed, when houses are being demolished? How do those lessons of the war in Vietnam apply to the situation in Israel and Palestine?
So I can tell you what my druthers would be, not easy to pull off. What I would like to see is a Jewish, Christian, Muslim, American Jewish, Christian, Muslim coalition demanding that the US government act. And I think it's fairly easy to figure out. I think the American government, the US government, American, US. I try to think of the American people and the US government. But I think it ought to call an emergency conference on peace in the Middle East that it says everybody has got to show up to. The nascent unified national government of Palestine, the Israeli government, and all pick up on the Arab Peace Initiative. But that ain't gonna happen until there are serious Jews, Muslims, and Christians together who can say to each other, this is what we agree on, and then mobilize at the grassroots for it. So both JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, and J Street, and to some extent Americans for Peace now, are the beginnings of such a possibility in the Jewish community. But it's clear the majority of real flesh and blood breathing Jews would totally agree with that, not the official institutions. And it's clear that an actual majority of the American Muslim community would. And I think clear that a big majority of American Christians would. But everybody, out of fear of each other's establishments, has not yet been willing to come together in such a way. It's the only way I can imagine that it could be dealt with. And if there were too many, one of me would be working on that. I made a decision. I write about I just wrote a piece about the relationship between love, admiration, and idolatry for Israel. Because it slops over very easily. One of the great rabbinic stories, some of the rabbis went out trying to hunt for the impulse for idolatry. They thought if they could find it, they could kill it, and then there wouldn't be any idolatry anymore. And they finally found it hiding in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And I think the point of the story is, why bother with idolatry for something minor? If you're going to make an idol, take something really serious, even sacred, and make an idol out of it. So many, not all, American Jews had made an idol out of what began as sacred, and for good reason, as sacred. Complex.
Piggybacking maybe on the interfaith dimension, I am in retirement now, and the interfaith community liaison for Montgomery County. And I cannot keep up with all of the interest that is coming in on a variety of issues, because people are finding and are wanting, they're looking for each other across not just Jewish, Muslim, Christian, but Hindu and the multiple Buddhist traditions, and on and on. On the whole issue, though, of like the two-state or what's going on, that, even for those of us that have been working together now with strong bonds, cannot deal with openly, publicly. Somehow we're doing that separately, back to what Dick was saying. So even on this issue, you need to be very strategic as you think about it. Where we have found the most traction, by the way, that's relevant because of what's happening, is close to home to us in this area now, is Baltimore, is police relations. And that's just a natural for us. From the 60s on, the second thing any person should do, any faith leader stepping into a responsibility, is to call the police chief and ask for a ride-on. But how many really do that? And we've come up now, because of the work we've done over some time with the police, working together with the government and so forth, is a model. And we don't have enough time right now to deal with people wanting to learn more about it. We've got 50 different countries come to visit it, because it's related. There are two keys to this that make it kind of the example that Homeland Security is promoting as number one, is that it's driven by faith leaders. It's community-centric. That means the police or government don't invite us to these meetings. Faith leaders do. And for the faith leaders to have credibility, it means it's not my particular faith tradition. It's all of us together. And that's working. So I just kind of throw that out as something else for people, because it's pretty easy to get to do, really.
Let me come back just a little bit. Sometimes when we get in groups like this, what Arthur just suggested is not something that you can do in a day. It's some real hard work, and probably more prayer. Probably needs more prayer than work. So I'm always concerned, well, where does that leave you? Okay? So I just finished a novel, a memoir by someone you'd never know. He's a German writer, blah, 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 and he's telling the story. These are a good Catholic family in Germany and what they did to oppose Hitler. It's the best memoir I've ever read. And it fed my feeling about being a good incrementalist. So he has 3 sons. The Germans are isolating the Jewish community. They're not taking them away, they're making sure no one talks to them. And they're isolating them in their own homes, so they can't go out on the streets except certain hours of days and nights. So he says to his 3 sons, would you please go visit Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so on Thursdays, and would you go on Wednesdays, and would you go on? All they're doing is visiting, having tea in the afternoon. That's all. That's all. It made me cry. It's what you can do. What can you do? In addition to the larger political, and I think sometimes we wait for this and forget there are 10,000 small things that anybody can do in any situation that's a contribution. So I make, when someone gets back to Barnabas, my gift is, I make a gift to the little village in Israel, the village of peace, where Palestinians and Jews have been living for 35 years. Thank you very much. They go to school together, and they learn each other's language, and is that going to make peace come? No. Sure. Thanks to the Catholic sisters who gave them the properties of the state of Israel, can't even deal with them. You know, it's an ecumenical thing, you know. So I think all of us need to, in the middle of trying to do something really hard, even in Baltimore, there's some very human, what I call soft, but really important things you can do that will not immediately bring justice to anybody, but it's acts of friendship, solidarity.
There's no food in the neighborhood, so people are
Absolutely.
handing out sandwiches.
Showing up at a black church on Sunday.
This weekend in Montgomery County, by the way, the Muslims are organizing a major food drive. We've already had nonprofits picking up 200 meals at a time, pouring out again this interfaith group.
Yeah.
And we know, for instance, based on what we've done, organizing in advance, what happened in Baltimore last Tuesday night could never happen in Montgomery County. Because we're already there. I'm on call 24/7, responding to any act of hate or violence with people on call on an interfaith basis. And that's not that difficult to put together. And once it's done, that's when you really draw support, because then you've got both faith community and government working together.
So I'd like to ask you a question to connect these two, because I think what Dick said is really important. So in your situation where you're saying basically you can't talk Israel-Palestine in this interfaith thing, would you be in a place to be able to say to your people, look, the organization can't, but here is a bunch of resources. If you go visiting in each other's homes, talk about this.
No, that's happening. We're having dinners with other things.
But talking about Israel-Palestine, but the organization isn't taking...
No, we have the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society that meets on a regular basis. And they're dealing not just with what makes us alike, but what makes us different. They've been doing it for some years. So that's where I refer folks. And I'm in touch with them on a continuing basis.
Good.
But the other one is so sad. See, in order for me to get the job done that I need to get done, I need to be working with the hierarchy. The Jewish Community Relations Council executive has said publicly, any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. If that's the starting point, That ends the dialogue
Is that
right there.
Is that from Baltimore or Washington?
Montgomery County.
Right here.
I'm Bruce Burchard from Philadelphia. In the mid-60s, I encountered Quakers and became a Quaker. And in the 50 years since then, really all of my activism has been grounded in, and to some extent through, the Quaker community. I want to note three things. Well, I want to start by saying that we always need to be strategic. We need to be thinking, and definitely not, I mean, there have been times in the last several hours when I felt like we're going back to what it was like in the 60s and the 70s, and why isn't it like that now? Well, it's not like that. Yes, there are lessons we learned, but please, let's not think that our goal is to go back to what we were doing then. Things have changed. One of the things that's changed, and this speaks to being strategic, is that, and this is on the war, the perpetual war, the war on terrorism issue, is that we have an African-American president who many of us and most progressive people in the country work very hard to elect. And he has tried, with varying degrees of effectiveness, to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. At the same time, he and his administration are promoting drone strikes, you know, all the things that we're familiar with. I think as a religious community, two areas that occur to me where I think we have a particular role in the larger movement against that kind of war is one on in the Christian, Jewish, Muslim dialogues, obviously. And the other, I think, is around the whole policy of the drone strikes and so on. There is a clear moral position to take on those, on both things. The second thing I want to say is, like you, Arthur, I think that climate change and the environment is going to be the defining issue of this century. And we old anti-war folks need to join with the other folks, many of them younger, who recognize this and are working on this and organizing. I want to cite one thing that a small group of Quakers did in Philadelphia. They formed something I call...
5 minutes.
I better finish in 60 seconds. They formed a small group called Earth Quaker Action Team, and they took on the PNC Bank for its investments in companies that are engaged in mountaintop removal mining, and they won. If you saw it in the New York Times a month or so ago, PNC has decided to phase out all their investments in those kinds of companies. A very, strategic or tactical decision, real focus. We can do things like that.
Chris, would you talk about shareholder activism once he's finished?
And the final thing is that I work a lot now with 20 and 30-year-old young people, and it's really encouraging. I'm sorry, some of the things that were said last night about where are the young people. They are doing things. We're just not in very good touch with them.
Well, I've worked with Amalgamated Bank and communications workers doing shareholder advocacy, corporate governance research, and there's a lot of interfaith work in that area touching on the environment, on human rights, labor rights. So I've talked to Michael about this. That's another area that I think can bear a lot of fruit in terms of these communities working together.
There are two really different, at least tactical, maybe strategic views of the stockholder relationship. One is engagement, and what many people working on the climate question have concluded is there's no way to get BP or Exxon to change the business plan enough. Their whole business is burning oil and burning the world. That's why McKibben, 350.org, et cetera, have taken the stance they've taken. And nobody thinks, including McKibben and 350, that financially withdrawals of investments from those companies is going to do those companies in. In fact, I'm maybe giving this religious language, but McKibben taught Sunday school for years, so maybe he might as well. I think the point is to make it morally abominable to burn the planet. And the withdrawal of investments is only a part of that. I'm gonna, I don't know how to do this. I've got two things here. I don't want to screw up the discussion that we only have about 3 or 4 minutes for, and I don't want to not get these out.
Can you and I hand them out as they need?
That's fine, okay.
I would
Thank
like
you.
to say, I'm not as pessimistic about the corporate activity. During the height of the Vietnam War, there was a huge protest against the Dow Chemical Company. And in one of the stockholder meetings where we were out there in force, Carl Gerstecker, the president of the board, calling me a fascist. Gerstecker called me a fascist.
He would know.
Responded to a question by our good friend Dan Bernstein, a $1 million broker from Wall Street. And Dan Bernstein stands up. He didn't sit with us. He sat over there, his beautiful sharkskin suit, and stands up and he says, I don't understand. I work on the street all the time. You're getting no money out of the Napalm contract, and it's causing you all kinds of problems on the campuses. And Carl says, Mr. Gerstecker says, you should know our recruiting is up, and on he went. Fast forward 8 years later, my friend Harvey Cox calls from Boston, and he said, guess what? I have in my hand a case study done on the recruiting practices of Dow Chemical back in the day. And the grade point average of kids applying for jobs dropped 1.2 grades. It went from 3.8 to 2.6 in 2 years. So they had plenty of kids coming. They just weren't getting the kids they wanted. But we find out 8 years later. So you can always exact some cost.
That's right.
You may not turn the company upside down all at once. I can tell you.
So that's what I mean by moral,
Yes.
whatever I said.
And I apologize because we have to fly out here soon for a commitment. We'll be back this afternoon. But it seems like the religious community has also a place beyond the organizing to shape a narrative and to stir the moral imagination.
Yeah.
And we sit on so many teachable moments. I mean, the faith community is involved in more acting, but it's beyond police relations. I mean, this is why is there so much desperation? You know, or when the Pope encyclical comes out, it's, you know, he's going to talk about the economy of exclusion. Now, it's sort of what they did to Martin Luther King. You know, some people say that means don't use, you know, whatever what's the cups, the styrofoam cups. We have to take a narrative. Or when the presidential elections, all we're going to hear from these candidates are America has to be strong and that's the military. But that's where it just seems like every time those statements come out, where is our voice to say that is not what it means to be strong? So we have to shape values and take advantage of these moments to bring a moral voice. So I think our capacity to get our leaders and use these moments to unmask the lies and shape a narrative that's going to inspire people. That is not what it means to be strong military power.
The Pharaoh story, I just want to say, there are two elements of the Pharaoh story that are right on point. One was the so-called overseers. They were cops, right? Mm-hmm. And Moshe first responded by killing one of them. I mean, my God, you know, people get really upset about the riots. And, you know, and the other thing is, Pharaoh had a chariot army, right? And when he woke up the morning after saying, so go, 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 get out, and he couldn't stand it. He was so addicted to his own power, he couldn't stand it. He mobilized the army. And that is what drowned in the Red Sea, right? So that, the Pharaoh imagery has so many extraordinary dimensions that we could be drawing on. And from a Christian standpoint, not only is the story, you know, sort of brought in through what you all call the Old Testament, but the Holy Week is rooted in Passover, is rooted in the memory of overthrowing Pharaoh. If you're a radical rabbi from the Galilee and you want to mobilize a march against the Roman Empire, of course you pick Passover because everybody remembers what happened to that empire.
I think one quickie. I just, if anybody hears from Marilyn, in addition to you, if you're involved in trying to bring change about in the Maryland General Assembly through a religious group. I'm very involved in secular, non-religious groups trying to address the issue of climate change, social justice. We'd very much like to be in touch with you. So I was heartened by your statements and other statements. But we find a vacuum, unfortunately, when it comes to the religious community in Maryland politics.
Yeah, there's a sub-theme here. It has to do with the institution vis-a-vis the faith community. We're the faith community here. I'm a student of history. In Germany, when Hitler took over, the first thing he did was to make sure that there was a pastor in every Catholic and every Lutheran church. Why? Because it was a force for stability for his own regime. The institutional church, the synagogue, well, church in Germany could not find its voice, and neither can the institutional church here in this country. I think we have to be very clear, whether we are going to be the faith community here, whether it really is, as Annie Dillard says, it's us, there never has been any other, or whether we want to waste a lot of time making sure that the encyclical reads exactly right, and then it's not even preached from the pulpit. It's up to us, folks, and let's not waste our time trying to go through the institutions.
And that is why I got involved with the Catholic-inspired Atlantic-like community. And
Before you guys leave, there's another piece of paper.
No, I found collaborating with the Network of Spiritual Progressives very enlightening. And I think it also helps the fact that they structurally provide an interfaith context as well. Network of Spiritual Progressives. Michael Lerner. Oh, yes.
Before people leave, does anybody have a black piece of paper and flat thing that people want to keep in touch with each other, can write their names and emails on? Okay.